Now, we'll go over, I think, to the pastor's handbook, and we're looking at the choir, nave, and their furniture. It says, little need be said about the choir, as so much depends upon the architecture of the church. It should not be crowded with benches and desks, which has a very bad effect, but kept as open as possible. Where there is little room, it is far better not to have a surplused choir, so that only stalls for the clergy and a few seats for the servers will be needed. The stalls for the clergy will vary according to the size and customs of the church. In large churches, as well as in collegiate churches, return stalls were formerly used. The clergy will need an extra shelf for books and a similar shelf for the men. Partitioned between each seat will be useful. It is my experience that the boys behave better if they have nothing at all to kneel up against. They will then kneel bolt upright with nothing to screen them on a strip of matting, say of dark green or red, and this will also give the choir a more open look. Okay, so he's saying that if boys have something in front of them to lean on or lean up against, then they get up to mischief. Having once been a boy, I think it's fair to say that's true. So no wood or metal work that can possibly come in the way should have sharp edges or corners. That makes sense. And no nails should be allowed to be fixed in the wood by those who carry out decorations. Well, that makes sense because over time, nails can very often stand proud and can catch on clothing and also can cause some sort of injury. So, any kind of joinery really, we would hope would be done without the use of nails. So, the lighting of choirs by flaring gas standards is a practice much to be avoided. Still more so when two gaudy brass standards are placed near the altar. These things are nearly always very offensive in appearance. They get in the way, they are costly, they waste a great deal of gas, and they contribute towards spoiling and dirtying everything in the church. So that's really interesting because I'm assuming that when he's talking about this flaring gas standards, these are things that I've seen advertised on the internet recently as being something you have in the garden. They have a gas cylinder underneath. You turn them on, and there are flames flickering. Right, so it's purely for decoration, I'm guessing. But interesting. So he really doesn't like these things. There are many other ways of managing the light. For instance, incandescent burners may be fixed out of sight at the side of the choir, in which case their reflectors should throw the light onto the stalls, and 2 burners on each side will suffice for a not very large church. If the burners are fixed on standards, it is best that these should be plain and stand in the midst of the benches. So again, he's really saying a minimalist approach. Right, that's the language we would use these days. A minimalist approach. Anything that can distract anyone from the worship, from the sound of hymns being sung, the sound of the choir singing, should be avoided. So let's get back. It says, if oil lamps are used, they too should be well shaded. In those churches that are fortunate enough to have electric light, it is generally better not to use the old gas fittings, which may conveniently be got rid of at the installation. For electric lighting lends itself to peculiarly light and graceful methods. And it's true, uplighting springs to mind. When you go into some churches these days, especially if they've been retrofitted with some LED uplighting, it's very, very impressive. It shows off the architecture beautifully, and it can be very subtle. So the placing of the wires can you just can't see them, right? So all of the wires these days. I think we read this, and it says a lot. We can learn a lot from what he was saying back then, and we can think about how does that apply to us now, and it really does, right? It really does. So very, very good. So anything like throwing a theatrical light onto the altar is strongly to be condemned. So throwing light onto the altar is different than uplighting the vaulted ceilings, I think, which I've seen a couple of cathedrals, demonstrating they're trying to get to a zero carbon, and they've replaced their lighting with LEDs, and it looks fantastic, in my opinion. It looks great. So, gas or electric lights on the altar itself are intolerable. The general rules about all lighting, whether in nave or choir, should be that it be of a simple and unobtrusive nature as possible, and that if possible, it be not obtained by naked gas jets burning to waste, that it not be placed at any height, but that the principal aim be to place it near to where it is wanted for the people to see their books, so that there is as much quiet shade in the church as possible. The less gas is burned, the better. People are more drawn to and impressed by a church that is not filled with flaring lights, though often they do not know the reason, and the present craving for a fussy crowd of candles on the altar is in great measure caused by the want of a reasonable proportion of light and shade in the rest of the church. Right. Wonderful. So I think that's going to be enough for us today, right? We've had a look at the choir nave and their furniture. It's very good. I really enjoy reading Dearmer and reflecting. I mean, it would be interesting to have a parson's handbook written, covering every single point, but bringing what he says up to date. I think that would be fascinating, and something everyone could use. But the reality is, as many points as possible should be left, as though maybe it could be a book where actually you have Dearmer's original text, and then underneath could be a narrative in a different colour or a different type of font, saying actually this is how we interpret that these days, and we stick to his principles. That would be a very interesting project. So now let's then, we move on from Dearmer, and we're going to look very briefly now at this book, which is John Pritchard's The Life